Whether it's a Pogostemon, a Crypt, Hygrophila, or moss, it doesn't really matter. Every plant has that little thing that you can do to take it from good to outstanding. It's time for 5 more tips from a Master Aquatic Horticulturalist. Hello everyone, this is Bentley, and today we're going to do a second edition of 5 tips on 5 plants. So if you recall last time, up in the corner right now, we talked about several super popular plants in aquascaping. Well, now we're going to talk not only some aquascaping favorites, but some of the weirdos that are out there too. So, let's dive in. 5 tips, 5 plants. Number 1, CRYPTOCORYNES. This is a really broad one. And while I probably have 10 or 20 different tips for crypts, let's go with the easiest one, and that is something I've oftenly referred to as the grape leaf trick. Now, you might be wondering, what? Grape leaves? It's really simple. Crypts, no matter which species they are, tend to come from relatively iron-rich environments, meaning that they are used to a higher iron content than a lot of the plants that we keep. And while you might think, shouldn't that only be the red ones? This is all crypts. Whether they're green, red, brown, it doesn't matter. They all really like a lot of extra iron. That's the general tip. But the little part about the grape leaves. Grape leaves are rich in iron, and it's really common around certain circles of crypt fanatics to take some grape leaves in immersed setups and even in their aquariums and rip them up and put them down into the substrate to act sort of like an iron-boosting root tab. As those grape leaves break down, they provide all sorts of nutrients and just wonderful stuff, but more importantly, they're a great source of iron. The grape leaf trick. Take your crypts from looking okay to looking amazing. Number 2, floating plants. This is another kind of broad category one, but it's very simple. For our floating plants, I've often heard people say, hey, I've got floating plants, but they're melting, they're dying, they look terrible. What's going wrong? This almost always is because you're using a lid. Floating plants like to be toward the top surface, but they need a certain amount of air to really thrive. If it gets too humid and moist right on top of the leaves, it can often cause those plants to die. They really do like to keep the top of their leaves fairly dry. Now, they can get wet every once in a while, but a constant super humid environment is not going to be what they need to thrive. Now, you might say, hey, if my plants are thriving, I've got too many of them. Maybe I need to have them in a super humid environment. But if you're looking to have really stellar looking floating plants, maybe you've got red root floaters, Asian watergrass, something that's a little cool, a little different, or you're doing it for an aesthetic, make sure that you have a good amount of room between your lid and the top of your water line so that it's not too close, creating a super humid environment, or even worse, causing your water flow to actually continuously churn those floating plants completely underwater. Roots in the water is okay. Tops of the leaves, we want to avoid that at all cost. Keep them dry, keep them fly. Our third one, a little sneaky, and yet it's going to sound like a second verse. Pogostemon Helferi, sometimes known as Downoi, or I guess it's Downoi? Science, right? But more commonly, the true name now is Pogostemon Helferi. That's that little squiggly looking plant that stays pretty short if you give it really good light. The trick with this plant, a lot like crypts, they come from iron-rich environments, and often what I've seen is people who are struggling with this plant are not producing enough iron down in the roots to help ensure that this plant really thrives. So, how do we easily fix that? Iron. Now, unlike the grape leaf trick, I'm going to suggest one of two things. Either A, find yourself some root tabs that have a good iron content to them. And one of the easiest ways is to find one of the reddish looking clay style root tabs. These are becoming less and less common, finding more capsule style root tabs, but you can find them if you go looking. Or get yourself a little bit of fluorite red or some form of laterite, I personally would suggest looking into the laterite powder or some of the laterin substrat that is done by Brightwell Aquatics. Really, really easy way to get laterite, but basically get that stuff down in the substrate, down at the root level, so that there's a constant source of iron for those Pogostemon to sit there and feed off of. That will make sure that they look amazing and a little weird all at the same time. Fourth plant, Hygrophila Pinnatifida. I cannot tell you the number of times I've gotten questions about this plant because it can be a little tricky. It's newer to the hobby, it's not quite super common, and it's tricky too. Now, this can be planted either in the substrate or be used as an epiphyte plant. Both will be successful. Medium light is really encouraged, but really if you want to keep it short, high light is what you truly need. In medium light, it's going to start growing tall. The big trick to this plant, holes in the leaves are extremely common. Usually this means we need to add some potassium. And yes, Pinnatifida loves a little extra potassium. However, there's a trick to this. If you notice that the leaves are curling a lot, or you're kind of getting some yellowish tint instead, what this could actually mean is that you either have too much iron or not enough. Weird, right? Usually it's too much. This plant, despite being a red plant, does not get extra red coloration from iron. So frequently what a lot of people will do is dose lots and lots of extra iron trying to get that beautiful red color out of Pinnatifida. But what happens is when there's too much iron available to this plant, it causes a health problem that looks a lot like a potassium deficiency. You'll get tiny little holes in the leaves. So if you've got tiny holes in the leaves, if your potassium dosing is somewhere between 20 and 25 parts per million, potassium's not the issue with this plant. Unless you have, like, say, a ton of really potassium-hungry plants like Java ferns. What you're probably doing is actually putting too much iron in the system. In order to get that Pinnatifida, that beautiful red color, you either need to starve it of nitrates, have very, very low nitrates, or have extremely strong light, not excess iron. So often the biggest problem that we run into with Hygrophila Pinnatifida, way too much iron. You want to make it look healthy and look amazing? Ease up on the iron. Make sure you got just enough potassium so that you don't get the pinholes. Our final plant is something that's become quite a favorite of a number of aquarists, and while it's not always used in aquascaping, if you do this plant right, it looks incredible, and that is Pogostemon Erectus. There's two tricks to make Pogostemon Erectus really, really successful. Typically, Pogostemon likes soft water, and this will help you get all that water column fertilization into that plant. However, there's a big trick. If you want to keep this plant in harder water, so this is something that's going to be more alkaline and tends to have a higher mineral content, greater GH and KH, you need to feed it at the roots. Very commonly, one of the problems that we run into is with Pogostemon Erectus, not enough available nutrients at the roots of the plant. Even in soft water, this can be an issue where the bottom of the plant will start to die off and it will kind of detach from the bottom and become floating. You'll have to replant it. This usually means there's not enough nutrients being fed to the plant at its roots. In hard water, you especially need to feed it at the roots in order to make it survive. Now, normally to get really, really successful with this plant, you want reasonably decent light. Medium to high is preferred, and a little bit of CO2 to get it super bushy. But it can be kept without CO2. If you do so, make sure you understand your water. If your water is soft, lots of water column fertilization, so whether it's EI dosing, all-in-one liquids, however you're doing it, get it up in the water column. If you're in harder water, make sure that you're getting something like root tabs to feed those plants at the roots. That will give you the best avenue to success to make this plant as stellar as it can be. Those are our 5 tips. Super simple ways to take plants from okay to wow with very, very little work. If you appreciate videos like this, give it a little thumbs up. Leave a comment down below what you learned. maybe even share it. That is super helpful with the magic YouTube algorithm to help your favorite local plant nerd out. If this is your first time watching my channel, I've got tons of videos like this to teach you all sorts of tricks and tips on plants, including my Plants for Profit series, a series all about learning how to make money off of plants way better than you ever can doing breeding for profit. Check those videos out. I'm going to have them at the end of this video. Consider subscribing. Maybe even ring that little notification bell. That way you don't miss any videos like this in the future. Product reviews, live streams every Tuesday. All sorts of fantastic information to make your aquarium a better place. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome.